Hello everybody, thank you for waiting this morning. We just thought we'd give everybody time to come in. My name's Dr. Sumner, I'm the Head of Positive Education and Wellbeing. Today we're also joined by Elise Rickford, our Higher Education Careers Counsellor. And also we've got two of our Year 10 students here who have had a lot of involvement in wellbeing and mental health support in school. So we've got Sharvita and Samvi with us this morning. And thank you for coming to the first Wisdom Wednesday session of this term. We thought this a very important topic because what we understand is that things like stress and anxiety in children and young people has increased over the last few years. So it's something that we need to understand more about and equip ourselves with the knowledge and tools to support our students through this journey. So what we'll cover today, we want to actually let you hear from the students themselves about what it is that they feel stressed about or anxious about, what they feel helps them, what the school does, and what parents can do to support. And then Elise and I will go through a presentation, look at how can we recognise stress and anxiety in children and young people, and also think about what some of those common experiences are across primary and secondary. And then we'll talk to you about some strategies that you can use to support with this. So I will hand you over to our students now who will share their experiences with you.
Good morning, parents. My name is Charvitha, and I'm currently a student in Year 10.
Good morning, I'm Sanvi, and I'm also a student in Year 10. For today's PowerPoint, we'll be covering common struggles faced by students, what is school doing to help, and what can parents do to help. So these are some common struggles: acceptance, stress, anxiety, and trust.
Some of the biggest problems faced at school for me when I first moved to secondary was like dealing with the amount of work that comes with like moving from primary to secondary. And when I first started at Year 7, it was like right during COVID, so there was only 3 classes and we were all in our rooms. But it got immediately overwhelming when I moved to Year 8 and there were so many kids around me. And from my experience, like I can tell you that like as a student, moving from primary to secondary is extremely hard, and the amount of tests and homework that we start getting, it becomes overwhelming because my sister, she gets like a little bit of homework each week, whereas like I'm doing homework every day now, and like the comparison between the amount of homework we get is like insane.
To add to that, from Year 9 to Year 10, the amount of coursework and homework added is kind of overwhelming, and that's stress right there. We also have acceptance, and that is when teenagers struggle to be accepted by their peers and their teachers and just their classmates by the way they behave and their personality.
When students first like move into secondary, they're starting to like become more responsible, more individualistic, and it's really hard because it's hard to find a place that you fit into at start, because it's hard for you to find a balance between being yourself and also being someone that other people want to be around, and it becomes like confusing at first. And I found that it was like really helpful to talk to my teachers about it or my parents about it. And like the support I got from adults around me really helped. When students first move into like secondary, everything looks like really shiny and everything looks like exciting, and they tend to take up like a lot of responsibilities, take up a lot of extracurriculars, take up a lot of extra activities, and that gets overwhelming, and this could lead to like stress and burnout in the future when they don't feel excited or they don't feel like motivated to do anything. And another thing that like tends to like pressure students is like academic validation. When we're trying to this is something that happens every time we have tests in class. We start comparing our test grades with each other, and some people feel happy about it, some people feel sad, and that just that comparison that students create, like A's in each subject doesn't always mean that you're like the best student in there. Younger students find it harder to understand that like personality and other things you do, and like being well-rounded doesn't mean that you have to have perfect grades. It's hard for them to understand that.
Another thing that happens is that teenagers kind of think that they have to reach other people's expectations for them, and they make high standards for themselves just by looking at others. It's really hard for them to trust others just because of secrets, and they really contemplate life. They're like, if I tell this person, is something gonna affect me by this? So that's also another struggle.
Like issues with anxiety around like what other people think about you can lead to like low self-esteem, and this affecting like your performance at school and your relationship with other friends and peers. Like this is one of the hardest things that like you face. Like when you move into secondary, it's not just like grades and the other things you're doing. You also struggle a lot with like trying to fit in and having to make friends.
So these are a few things that school does to help. Every teacher actively listens to the students' struggles. All of the teachers in Regent are approachable, which means that if we feel that we are having any struggle, we can go to them, we can talk to them, and it always makes us feel better. It always makes us feel valued.
When I walk into like school every day, it feels more of like a community to me. It feels more like home because I've been here since year 7, and I've made like a lot of I have a lot of relationships with everyone in the school. Like I know there's teachers that I can go to when I struggle with anything. I know there's adults that I can go to when I need support or help with anything. And one of the biggest things that helps at this school is that like you can always approach someone. There's always someone who's ready to come up to you, like to listen to what you're worrying about and to help you like overcome an obstacle.
The teachers always take action when they believe that something's wrong or something that can affect the child's well-being. Another thing that the school does is the well-being forms. Every single year, our school holds out a well-being form asking the students if they feel safe, if they feel valued, if they're being bullied, or any other issues that could concern their well-being. This helps our school look forward and help those.
So last year, me and Sanwi were well-being champions, and we went over like the results of the forums with our teachers, and we tried to implement different things in order to improve like the well-being results of our school. And like over the 3 terms, we had the test taken 3 times, and we saw like an increase, we saw a more positive result each time.
We also have just the right education. The teachers always give right education and information to all students, and they have VIA lessons to promote no bullying. We have mental health days, well-being events, and of course the well-being champions.
Yesterday was in fact like World Mental Health Day, and we did a lot of things in order to like improve our awareness around like mental health. And like during our VIA lessons, each week we focus on a different character strength and we try to work on it. Last week was assertiveness, and I think this week is love.
Last year, we put out forms and posters which had like a QR code. So if any student feels like they need someone to talk to, they can just scan it and there'll be someone there to assist. So parents, how can you help your teen? You can do many things, including keeping promises, giving them privacy, setting boundaries, actively listening, talking to them, staying connected, and praising them.
One of the biggest things you can do is stay involved in your child's lives, because the moment they move to secondary, they have a whole list of responsibilities. And I found that like my mom became my best friend when I moved into secondary. She helped me with some of my responsibilities. She helped me organize my life better. And help your child. Like, don't pressurize them with responsibility. Instead, explain to them and help them understand how they can deal with the responsibilities they have and how they can like maximize their time.
Always actively listen to them. If they are talking to you about something they feel like they struggle with, always be there to give them advice and make them feel like they can trust you, and make them feel like you're always there.
Create like a comfortable space for them at home. Like make them feel comfortable at home. Make sure that like they can come to you when they need help, or they can also like they have somewhere like with some privacy, so they can like think about think about what's happening with them, just like reflect over everything that's going on.
And also set boundaries. Sometimes students feel like they can do certain things, but of course when you set boundaries, you discipline them and you help them with their own mental health.
Listen to them and communicate with them and encourage them, because like one of the biggest things that students need when they're first moving into secondary is like help from their parents and help from the people around them, because it's not easy, and like become their best friend. Like ever since I moved into secondary, my relationship with my mom is like closer than it's ever been before, and like I really appreciate that, and I really wish that other students have that as well.
As she said, praise them. So when you encourage your own children, they feel like, yes, I can do this, I can do more, and they have like their own standards, and they believe that if someone else can do this, I can do it too.
Yeah, this is just us sharing like our opinion over our experiences, and we really hope this helps you like understand this from like a student's perspective. Thank you.
They have made all these slides themselves, all the content themselves. It has been developed by them, and really helpful messages there from our secondary students. So next we're going to look at how, as adults, we recognise anxiety in children and young people. So thinking about your own children, what signs do you see if they're feeling stressed and anxious? How would we know? Stomachache, yeah, exactly. Being over-emotional about small things, absolutely. Yeah, they are some of the signs. So we see physical symptoms, and we also see emotional symptoms and behavioural symptoms. So, as you've said, tummy ache, the head might feel fuzzy, they might have headaches, crying excessively, avoiding situations is a common one, and also disturbed sleep and trying to take control of things, because when we feel incredibly anxious or stressed, in order to try and feel calm again, we need to regain some control, because we're usually feeling out of control. So the reason why we wanted to touch upon stress and anxiety is because although they're different, they're very heavily linked. So when we talk about stress, we're thinking about external factors from our environment which influence the way we feel. So that would be some of the things that the girls covered, like academic pressure, social pressure, difficulties with relationships in school, outside school. So these types of things would cause stress. Anxiety is an internal response. So that's when children and young people will start to catastrophize things and worry about future events that might not ever happen. But if we have prolonged anxiety, it leads to stress. If we have prolonged stress, it leads to anxiety. So that's why it's important to talk about both of these today. I think one thing to acknowledge is it's very, very normal. Anxiety and stress are part and parcel of our human experience, and we do have an opportunity to intervene and teach children skills that build the resilience as they're coming up against these challenges, and that's really what we wanted to talk about today. We know students face stress and anxiety throughout their school career, as we do as adults as well. So what is healthy anxiety versus unhealthy anxiety? How we define the difference? Because we need to feel anxious in order to navigate our environment, to meet deadlines, to make sure work's completed. However, if it's prolonged, if it's over a period of time, over weeks, months, then it becomes more of an issue because it's impacting the daily life and functioning. So that's how we would discriminate the difference, because it's a normal feeling, a normal experience we have, but if we have it over a prolonged period of time, it becomes problematic because it impacts our health and our immune system, and we're more likely to get ill and catch infections and feel overloaded. So that's how we would look at what is the what is the response to the stresses in the environment? Is that proportionate to what's happening? If it's not, is that duration over a period of weeks and months that's affecting their daily lives? That's when we would think, well, we might want to explore this further or seek some specialist advice. So here's the kind of things that primary students worry about and become stressed about. We do surveys every term with both our primary and secondary students to capture this information. So this is the children in school, the things that they genuinely worry about day to day. I think it always comes first is friendships. Having friendships, feeling socially accepted, being able to manage and navigate conflicts. That's one of the key indicators for their emotional well-being. You know, they worry about feeling left out, they worry about their friends having other friends and being able to manage that. And also, they do worry about their academic performance. And some of the students that spoke earlier touched upon this because they do compare themselves to each other. And that is how they're measuring their own self-esteem and self-worth. And this is something we have to work with them on in school in order to help them measure against themselves rather than each other. And also, separation anxiety is something that we have seen an increase in, I think, worldwide actually. Post-COVID, it's something that's a lot more common in children and young people. So it used to be very common in early years, but now we can see it all the way up to Key Stage 2. So Elise is going to talk us through what some of the secondary students tell us about their common worries.
Good morning. Yes, this is working. So, as it was mentioned before, acceptance by their peers is essential at any stage in life, but it's particularly crucial at adolescence in kind of secondary sort of section of the lifetime, because this is the time where, evolutionary speaking, the students are going to start to prepare from leaving home into, moving into the world of their peers. So acceptance by others is absolutely fundamental to the well-being of children at this time. So how they are perceived by others is then a crucial key to that acceptance. And that can be, will have an impact on various areas, such as exam results and academic performance. Students, in a way, might be tempted not to achieve too much because you might be seen as perhaps a goody-goody two-shoes sort of thing, or perhaps if you're not performing quite as well, this can have an impact on how you're perceived by others. In the same vein, perhaps the way you look and going through puberty and the changes that you are experiencing at this time can also be a factor for, to become more self-conscious and perhaps struggling with this acceptance. So these are things that are, I was going to say, kind of a key aspect of the perceptions of others. The other thing, particularly in the area that I'm dealing with, is exam results and perspectives for the future. Now, we all want our children to do really well in life, and we all want them to go to the best universities with the best results and all of that. But despite all of that, it won't happen for some of us, for some of our children. And we can perhaps as parents put a lot of pressure on our children in order to encourage them to do this, to sort of, sorry, I'm getting lost here. We may put too much pressure on our children for them to achieve and have great outcomes. Sorry, that wasn't very clear. So the expectations can be their own personal expectations. Students in teenage years can see things very much in black and white and may have unrealistic expectations for themselves, and that will generate stress because they may feel that actually perhaps these expectations are too high for them to reach. All of us here, I suspect, or at least most of us here, have left family behind. We have family abroad and we don't see them very often, or we've just moved here. And that separation as well can generate quite a lot of stress, particularly when it's linked to as well being accepted by a whole new group of friends. Some of us here as well perhaps are starting in the British curriculum, doing IGCSEs, doing A-levels, and we may not be really familiar with that system. And for the children as well, it might be quite difficult to understand, what does IGCSE even stand for? What does that mean? What does A-level stand for? How is that going to get me to the next stage of my life? Now that, if we don't understand the world we're navigating, it becomes very stressful because we just don't know which direction is the best one. There might be other family issues. That certainly was very clear during COVID, when people were under pressure with work, with financial circumstances that were changed by the pandemic. So when there are tensions at home, then that can also transpire on the well-being of the child, and that's obviously quite logical. And it's particularly stressful in the sense that children cannot have control of these situations. And the friendship tensions, managing relationships, making friends, again, that links back to the first point about being accepted by their group of peers. And as we grow up, as the children grow up, perhaps the friends they've always had since year 2, year 4, year 5 will grow apart because people evolve in different ways. And that adjustment can be quite difficult for children to navigate.
Yep. Okay, so we'll look at what it is we can do to support children and young people managing stress and anxiety and building a growth mindset. The place we always start is ourselves, and that is one of the number one contributors to how we can best support. So since we've got quite a full house here, the first activity, just want to speak to the person closest to you about what it is that you do to manage your own stress levels, and just share that with each other. Everyone, I just wanted to share that with you, because everybody sort of looks at first like, oh, but actually we just get on with stress and we just deal with it, and we don't necessarily have things in place to take care of ourselves and manage our stress levels and make sure that we're using like strategies from self-care to manage our own emotions, because there's things that we can do and role model for our children and young people which will give them healthy coping strategies to manage these things. The first thing is the oxygen mask analogy, whereas you have to support yourself and your own mental health and your own stresses in order to support the people around you. And when we're not feeling okay, that has an impact. Children and young people, they pick up the stress and the emotions of the adults around them. That goes to the adults in school and the adults at home. And that affects how they cope and they deal with their own emotions and stresses. So it's something that's really important just to remind ourselves. Of course, we all have busy lives and there's so many things we're juggling with. However, we need to take time for ourselves to actually manage some of the emotions and stresses that come up for us as well.
I'd like to mention something at this point. We remember when we mentioned about when Kaylee just said that children can feel the stress at home, the stress that you're experiencing. Whether we say it or not, they can sense it. As a teacher, I can tell you that the children are very good at sensing emotion. So perhaps one of the things that you can model is explain to the children, in an age-appropriate way, why is it that at the moment mom and dad are feeling a little bit tense? Because then the children then can understand where that comes from, and then if you're sharing with them, then they perhaps can feel that they can share with you as well. And if you say, well, mom and dad are feeling a bit stressed at the moment because financially dad is, mom and dad are not doing too well and business is a bit slow, but this is what we're going to do, and this is what things might be changing a little bit. And then suddenly he thinks, okay, now I know what's going on, and I can understand, the reaction around me, rather than I can see mom and dad are very tense and I don't know why, and maybe it's my fault, maybe it's something I've done, and that transpire back on me. So that's perhaps, I'd suggest that's probably quite a good strategy to sort of get it out there in the open.
Absolutely. So another strategy we would use, and this goes right from FS to secondary, is emotion coaching. So something we've done for many years, and previously parenting advice and strategies was very different to what it is now. We know so much more about neuroscience, the brain, well-being, mental health. So this is very current to how we can support children and young people managing their emotions. And there's a strategy called emotion coaching. And the first step for children to self-regulate is to actually label the way they're feeling, understand all the different emotions that they're experiencing every day. And what we do as adults most of the time is just, we'll say, oh, don't worry about that, don't cry, don't be upset, and that's our natural response. And there are times when we need to do that because of everything else that's going on in that moment. However, there are times we need to really support them and coach them through that process. And that means naming what they're feeling, if it is anxiety, if it is stress, if it is anger, if it is happiness, joy. Especially as they're coming through Key Stage 1, primary, up to secondary, they don't always know what it is they're feeling. And so the first step is those symptoms that we talked about and described, is to go through those with them. When you're feeling stressed and anxious, this is what happens. You get the headaches, you get the tummy ache. This is how you know you're becoming overwhelmed. And this is where we need to catch it and sit down and talk and see how things are going. Because if we can get it earlier before it builds up, then it's likely to have less of an impact on them. So really naming their emotions and attuning to them and validating it. And so the approach that I described that have been, perhaps the way we were parented, or is called the dishcloth approach. So it's just wipe emotions away, like they don't exist, we don't experience them, we just carry on. But in order for children to develop healthy emotional well-being and healthy regulation skills, they need their feelings validated. So we do something called separating the behavior from the emotion. So if we were seeing behavior that we don't want to see from our children and young people that isn't okay, we have to think about what emotion is driving that behavior, because emotions do drive our behavior. So we can validate the way they're feeling, whether that is anger or frustration, but we can also say the behavior is not okay, but the way you're feeling is okay, because we don't want to attach a sense of shame for what comes up for them, because what they're going to do is suppress it, and we want them to process it. And then the final step, so name the emotion, validate the emotion, and problem solve. So that's where giving them ownership on what they can do when they feel like this or they feel things building up. So an example of that would be, so when you have an argument with Sally, and it makes you feel this way, what do you think would help? Like, if the solutions come from them, they're more likely to use them. I know from working with students, I'll give them strategies, but they're not actually comfortable trying them because it's not something that would work for them. So if we can get out of them what they would like to do and how they would like to solve the problem and guide them through that process, it's a really helpful way of developing the problem-solving skills.
I'd like to add something to that. So perhaps to help them finding strategy that would work for them in managing their emotion is go back to the past, what has worked in the past, what was successful in the past, and let's build on that, because then they get a sense of success. When we're talking about emotion and behavior, sometimes when we can see anger, we think, okay, you're angry, because you're stressed, that makes sense. But sometimes the behavior and the emotion are not necessarily logically linked, or the logical link is not necessarily evident. An example of that would be if I have a student who lacks motivation to prepare for their exams. They're not doing anything, they're very despondent, they're quite lazy, to be honest, and they just don't want to do it. Now, that might not be seen as an emotion, but perhaps if we dig deep, it could be that the student is quite stressed and doesn't know where to start. And therefore, they'd rather not start because they just don't know how to, they know they have to go on the top of Everest, but they're not sure which base camps to go through first. So that's why talking to them about what it is that is stopping them from getting to where they need to be is really important, and perhaps not being too hasty in drawing conclusions from the behavior that we observe.
Absolutely. And also promoting a growth mindset. So this very much links to their learning, but there's so much current research about how growth mindset helps with academic resilience and also mental health and well-being. So this is a really common approach in schools that they use and teach, and it challenges that comparison agenda that some of the students have shared their thoughts with you on how it makes them feel when they compare themselves to peers who are perhaps performing at a different level to them. They see that as a reflection on them being the lesser person, you know, rather than having different sets of skills and strengths. So using growth mindset can really help counteract some of the way our system is structured that does impact our children's self-esteem. So that's praising effort and process. And what we mean by that, we are very outcomes focused. Now, FS is a different environment altogether. So FS is a great growth mindset approach to learning. As they move through higher primary into secondary, there is a huge focus on outcomes, results. And this, of course, it has an impact on their mental health and well-being. So the more that we can actually praise them for the effort they've put into a task, rather than that final score or rather than that final grade, the more that's going to encourage them to try, because it's very demotivating for students when they're just focusing on a number, on getting this specific goal, and when they don't necessarily achieve that, because we all fail sometimes, we don't always hit the mark that we're aiming for, and that's part and parcel of life. We keep trying, we keep moving towards it, and that's the main thing. So we often, what we say, there's something that we share with our staff, because as human beings we have something called a negativity bias. So we always jump straight to negative information. Our brains are wired to detect threats in our environment, so that's what it looks for. So there's an experiment where they showed parents results, grades from their children's GCSE results, and it was, 3 A's and a D. And where does your focus go? It goes straight to the D, and what's happened there? And then we actually forget all the achievements in that moment. And so that is something that we have to consciously try and manage with children and young people, to know that doing their best, the best that they're able to do, is good enough, and we will keep supporting them and keep coaching them and motivating them to achieve more than they did yesterday. And we really try and encourage them to compare to themselves and the progress that they're making, and really to protect and shield their self-esteem. And what we find, actually, children with high levels of anxiety can be very high attainers, because they place this expectation on themselves of perfectionism, which we know we're not able to sustain. They feel that adults around them are have these constant expectations that they should hit the mark every time. And sometimes the level of anxiety that creates means that they will avoid challenging tasks and therefore aren't stretching themselves. So that's what came through this research. So modelling our mistakes is really important, because in order for children to learn, they need to put themselves in a position where they're going to get it wrong and where they're going to fail. And they have to feel that they're in an environment where that's supported in school and that's supported in home. We make mistakes, we get up and we try again. And what we do as adults, we conceal our own mistakes. You know, as educators, we're guilty of it. We make a spelling mistake. Oh, like, we don't want anyone to see. We don't, like, the more we can normalize that this is okay and this is part and parcel of our learning and development, the more children and young people are going to take risks. And that's what we want them to do. We want them to take risks with their learning and push themselves and know that falling down and failing is sometimes part of that process. So this is what we try and support our staff to do, and also encourage parents to model mistakes and share things that have been difficult for us along the learning journey. And there's also the power of yet. There's lots of great resources and books on the growth mindset available online. And this was one of the statements that the founding researcher used, because what children often say, and we can hear it in the classroom, was, I can't do this. That's their starting point. Oh, I can't. Before even trying. And so we always try and use the word yes at the end of that sentence in order to create a pathway into the future. So, okay, you might not be able to do it right now in this moment, but you will be able to do it with persistence and effort in the future. So it is very much that coaching analogy of trying to get them to understand that even if something's a struggle for them, they can overcome it and achieve it with the adult support and encouragement. Here's something that I think is very important for students before they're going to take a test or an assessment. We know these are part and part of our school system, and sometimes they work against the well-being agenda, for example, the assessments and tests, but that is the education system we're in. This is how our children are measured on terms of what they can go on to access in the future. So grounding techniques are strategies that students can use before an exam to bring them into the present moment. And so what happens, they don't even have to use all of them, but if we teach them the strategy, 5 things that you can see in that moment. So that's, we look around the room, I can see the light switch, I can see the nursery over there, I can see the carpet, I can see the table. And what that does, it takes us away from those anxious racing thoughts that are increasing our heart rate and taking us away from what we need to do, brings us into the present moment and helps increase our focus on what it is that we need to do. Because in order to take a test or assessment, we have to be in the present moment and bring ourselves to there to maximize the performance. So this is a strategy they can use. 5 things they can see, 4 things they're able to touch, 3 things they can hear. If they can't smell or taste anything, they can think of their favorite smell or their favorite taste, but it will stop those racing thoughts. And that is a helpful technique that they can use. And also, practicing gratitude is something that is highly researched, and it is a way to frame students' thinking and to support them develop resilience, because without the conscious awareness of gratitude, because of that negativity bias that we have as humans, where we do focus on the negative events, negative media, everything going on in the world that's really, really quite distressing and sad, that makes us feel overwhelmed. So we have to be conscious about bringing ourselves to, okay, what's going well, what are we grateful for? And journaling is a great thing for primary and secondary students, even if that's journaling their stresses of the day. This is a way for them to offload and just process some of those emotions that they might not be processing during the day. So those are the things that we would advise to manage stress and anxiety in children and young people. So before you came today, you submitted some questions, and so we've put those questions on here, so we'll go through some of them now in terms of what it is that you want to know particularly about your child. So recognising symptoms of stress, so we've gone through that, so we have the physical symptoms and the emotional symptoms, and it's all about the duration that impacts whether it's something that becomes more problematic. How to prevent the...
Yeah, I was just going to add here for secondary students, in my experience, symptoms of stress can also include reluctance to do work, or perhaps doing work at the last minute, going to bed really late, that sort of thing, and doing things really at the last minute because we cannot cope with that particular task that we have to do. We don't think we're going to do very well at all. So that is a bit of a symptom as well. And the lack of sleep is a bit of a self-fulfilling one as well, where we all know that teenagers, well, I think we do, that teenagers can have slightly erratic sleep patterns. And certainly when we are stressed, I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed, I don't sleep particularly well, or I sleep too much. So that can also be a bit of a sign that there's something amiss there. So the best thing I suggest you can do with your children when you feel that they are being stressed is, what is the threat? Stress, anxiety is a response to a threat that is real or not. So let's identify what is that threat and how can we handle it? How can we deal with it? Because we're trying to avoid it. If I'm stressed about going to school, I'm going to say, oh, I've got a stomachache, I can't possibly go, and I've got this ailment or that sort of thing. We avoid facing up to the problem. So let's identify what the threat is and let's try to tackle it so that we don't feel stressed anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Screen time limits. So this is a hot topic in today's day and age. We have something in region called the National Online Safety Accreditation, and we have logins accessible for parents. It is different depending on your own parenting choices in terms of the screen time that our children and young people have. However, what I would say as a psychologist, the things to really be mindful of are what they're being exposed to whilst they are online. It is something that's ever challenging, even from a school perspective, that we're always trying to give talks, information, share things in assemblies, share things through their IT program, so that they're able to use their critical thinking skills and understand when something is not appropriate to be accessing for them, because it will affect their mental health. Frequent exposure to things that are inappropriate for their age, or it could be that they're watching things on the news about political events, and the time they spend watching that information is overloading them. So we need to just be mindful of what they're accessing and how frequently they're accessing these things. But the National Online Safety Accreditation that we've signed up to as a school has specific support and advice for parents, and we will do a session on this topic alone because it's a whole topic in itself to unpick.
I think as a parent I really struggle with that, because as a parent and an educator I really struggle with that, because I recognize that Google it, go on ChatGPT, find out the rules, because that's the way we learn now. That's the technologically advanced age we're in. So on the one hand I say go there and find it by yourself, be more independent, and on the other hand I say you spend too much time on the screen. So which one is it? And I think that's the fine line that we're having a little. I certainly have a bit of a tough time navigating. The other thing I'd like to point out as well is that sometimes students find a lot of support online. We talk a lot about the dangers online of, strangers and that sort of thing, grooming and these sort of threats. But there's also a lot of support online for perhaps children sometimes who need to connect. My family moved from Hong Kong, and my children are still in touch with their friends from Hong Kong, and they can connect with them there, they get support there. So there's also a lot of positive things in there, but I share your sort of concern, so those of you who have it, about how do we toe the line of what's acceptable and not acceptable? How can we also connect with the present, the here and the now in the room, as opposed to a virtual space? And I think that's quite a difficult one, I think, to navigate, and also we need to adapt it with age, because a lot of children, the older they get, the more connected they are. And if we stop them from having mobile phones, from connecting online, we might be actually isolating them socially, and that could be stressful for them. That's certainly a conversation I had with my children who are early in secondary, where they say everybody else does it, which is always, I always challenge that, because that's never true. But there is an element, there's a kernel of truth in it. So this is a difficult one, and I think there is no clear, easy answer on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we understand about the direction that the world is going in, actually screen time and the online world is just getting increasingly advanced, and there is more expectations and probably more job industries that are going to be in that area going forward. But we will put a talk on about that as well. Helping secondary students make friends. So I'd like to put this out to the audience. What can we do to support our students to make friends, primary or secondary? What kind of things have worked for your child?
Invite for play dates.
Absolutely, invite them round for play dates. Yeah, that's a good one.
Got another one here.
I had the same.
Oh, you had the same.
Yeah, yeah.
Bad luck.
That's helping to facilitate it, absolutely. Anybody else found anything that's been helpful?
Sports clubs, any hobbies they have together.
Yeah. Yeah, hobbies, ECAs, yeah. Anything else? I think you've covered the sort of some of the core ones there in terms of their exposure to extracurricular activities, their exposure to hobbies where they'll have opportunities to meet new people. Sometimes where our children are having like long-standing struggles with developing relationships with other students in school, we might just want to have that conversation with them to help them develop some of those skills. So for some students that are really anxious, and actually the thought of going over and starting a conversation with somebody is just so overwhelming, you know, so that's a barrier for them. So sometimes role playing that with them, okay, right, how can we start a conversation? What might we say to each other? Just the practice can be really helpful, especially for students that experience significant anxiety.
Been there, done that. Not me personally, but with my students. So if I can draw on my personal experience, we've had a conversation with the children about what makes a good friend. What qualities are you looking at in a good friend? And then throw the question back at them. Do you offer these qualities? Are you actually caring about other people? Do you share, you know, your equipment, that sort of thing? Because you cannot expect to make friends if you do not display these qualities yourself, first of all. The other thing is, you're never going to be friends with everybody in the room in one go. That's not going to, you get a chip at it. You say, oh yeah, this person looks nice. I think that she's playing the same video games as me, I saw that, and we have the same trainers, and find a way where you can connect, say, hey, you've got the same trainers as me, I like them, yeah, and then start a conversation like that. And one by one, you win them over. It's again the polarized thinking that teenagers may have, say, I don't know anyone, I don't have any friends. Challenge that, yes you do. This lady in the first row, she's very nice. You have the same trainers, oh yeah, I guess she's all right, you know, that sort of thing, and that actually changed the perception. So then again, rather than we're going to climb Everest to get at the top, we're going to be the most popular kid in the class, that's not going to happen ever, maybe, or if it does, it won't happen overnight. So, but we're going to go stage by stage, chip away at it, and then when we do that, we can see progress and we gain confidence. But again, relationships, let's remember, they're not linear. We don't always, you know, it doesn't get better every day. Sometimes we have a bit of a fight. Sometimes we disagree. And how do we deal with that? Are we forgiving? Or we say, oh, well, she said something about me, I'm never going to talk to her again, that sort of thing. Again, relax. We all make mistakes. Let's forgive. Let's move on. Let's accept. Once, maybe twice. After that, we can talk about it.
Absolutely. And there's a question on how we manage conflicts and confrontation between students particularly as they reach secondary school, when there's lots of different things going on for children and young people. So something we have in school is called a restorative approach. We use something called restorative practice, and the rationale behind that is when somebody has said something or done something that's harmed another person, or led that other person to feel really negative towards themselves or really upset, we would then look to, okay, how can we restore and repair this, and how can we allow the person that has been hurt in this scenario an opportunity to relay that in a safe space with an adult facilitated, so the other person gets to hear, actually this is the impact you've had by your behaviour. And so what can then we do together to make up for this, and how can we repair the relationship? Because a restorative approach isn't necessarily just focused on behaviour, but it's focused on the damage that's done to a relationship. You know, particularly children and students who are really great friends, and then there's a fallout, and then there's things that have happened and things that are said and people are upset. We very much take the approach, we need to bring them together, we need to educate them on the impact that this has had, and support them to problem solve so they can begin to develop the skills to manage these situations more independently. The students talked earlier about the values in action lessons we have as well, so that's really, really central to what we do in school. There's 24 character strengths that we focus on, from FS right up to secondary, where we are promoting those things in our children and young people, like kindness, teamwork, perseverance, leadership. They're key qualities that we expect to see from them, and that's ultimately what they get recognised for in their assemblies as well, and praised for. And we explore those qualities in depth so that they can have that wider understanding of themselves and their value system, and how their value system impacts people around them. Another question?
I was just going to tag on to this with another B word for banter. And I think sometimes children are very good at estimating what the limits of banter are. And I wasn't bullying, I wasn't being abusive, it was a bit of banter. But actually, banter when it's at the expense of somebody else can be really hurtful. And if we all banter at the same person, that turns into a very unpleasant experience for the child. So it's another thing that perhaps we can model. I'm terrible with that because I banter a lot. But perhaps we need to make sure that when we do it ourselves, we just be a little bit mindful of the feeling of others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And managing rejection, and I suppose it also depends in what capacity.
Yeah, that's going to be part of my job. Your children will be applying to university, and if they get offers from every single institution they apply to, well done me, well done them, but that won't happen. And it's not because we prepare them badly, it's because that's just the way it goes, and it's part of life. I was looking at an article yesterday, and I want to share the data with you because I thought that was quite telling. In the mid-80s, admission to Stanford University in the US, one of the most prestigious institutions, was about 15%. 15, 20%, something like that, in the mid-1980s. In 2018, it was 5%. 2022, 3.5%. Right? Now, I hate to say this, and this is going to stay in the room, but it was easier in our days. And actually, in our days, certainly mine, it was easier to be admitted to a prestigious institution than it is now. We won't tell them, but that's the truth. So if they aim high, they're going to be up against the rest of the world. The whole of China, the whole of India, the whole of Europe, the whole of the US, everybody's in it. And the 97% of the students who did not get admitted to Stanford, by the way, they all have top SATs, top exam results, stellar extra academic record, probably Olympic swimmers in there, you name it, they're all there. So yes, if you aim high, your chances of being rejected are also very high. But if you have to be in the game, you have to be prepared for that. And the fact that you're rejected doesn't mean that you are subhuman or that you're always going to be rejected. It's just that's part of life. And if you can't take it, perhaps you shouldn't go for that, because once you, even if you admit it, put it this way, the pressure is not going to stop once you step a foot in Stanford. It's going to be more pressure and more ambition. So rejection is not the end of the road, in the same way that getting a bad mark is not the end of the road. The analogy I use with my students is that Novak Djokovic, top tennis player, he's lost matches before. Loads of them before he got there. But what did he do? Dusted himself off, felt sorry for himself a little bit, for a little while, because that's normal. Yeah, we got to validate that, that's fair enough, but 3 days, and then we move on. What do we do next? To do better, to do differently. Okay? We may not be able to do better, but we need to do it differently. So that's how I think we need to manage rejection. In the same way, we have a role to play as parents to think, actually, yes, my son's going to apply to Cambridge or to Imperial College for engineering. One is going to be taken for 20 spaces, right? Same, we applied for UCL in London for psychology. There are 22 applicants per space. All these applicants meet the entry requirements, by the way, right? So chances of you being rejected, I'd say quite high. So let's manage expectations and say, yeah, we want to do psychology at UCL, absolutely, no problem. But let's have a backup plan, because if we don't, that would be reckless. So I think this is how we can help students and ourselves as well manage rejection and not take it personally.
Really helpful advice there. The last question we had was around English as an additional language, an English language learner, which in region alone we have around, now give or take, it might have changed a little bit, but the last time I checked, around 85 different nationalities. So we have children come into the school with very, very limited English language, that's not their first language, and so they're definitely not alone in that experience at all. The environment is very inclusive. However, it does bring along its own set of challenges when it comes to their self-esteem and self-worth, and that's what we see when they first transition in, because they've come from a completely different world. And now they've come from a schooling system where they were achieving, they were doing really well, and then they're in an environment where everything's so challenging, even just the basic modes of communication feel stressful, and that's before thinking about accessing the work until they've developed the adequate language skills. What I would say around that is we have a parent, I don't know if she's here today, we have a parent that comes in and does a talk specifically on how to manage this, and she's amazing. One of the things there's a couple of key things. One of them is when children are learning English, and this goes for all adults and staff around them, not to finish the sentences and not to correct mispronunciation. Because if they're learning it and they're having a go, they just need to build up pace and develop confidence with it. But the more we try and correct and perfect it at the early stages, the more they will feel like, oh, actually, I don't want to give that a go because I'm going to get it wrong, and it just affects the confidence. So we really need to build the skills of encouraging them to communicate in whatever method feels comfortable for them, and encourage and praise that. They have different support systems in school for it. We have different services that students are able to access when they're really struggling, and also our staff are equipped with technology and skills to be able to support students to communicate in ways so that their needs are heard, and we will appropriately adapt work for them until they develop the English language skills. But the best way is immersion into the environment in terms of developing the language, but it's also the most difficult on their confidence and self-esteem. But as they get better and as they start to pick up that language and skills and build friendships, which is key, you can really see them blossom and flourish with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Immersion is very effective, but it's exhausting. Been there as well. It's not all about me, let me tell you about it. But I have been there, and it is exhausting. And sometimes when we learn a new language, we do mispronounce things. I still do now. And I get picked up by my husband on that, actually. And then I pick up a fight normally when that happens. And we sometimes as well, the way we express things in our mother tongue and the way we express them in English can be quite different. Now, you may have noticed I am French, and the way French people express themselves, we tend to be a little bit direct. English people find that rude. We think it's honest. And so sometimes that lack of sort of alignment between the way we express ourselves and the way we speak can be misconstrued. You may say, oh, my new friend Elisa, she's very rude. No, she's just very French and learning English. So I think this is when we can accept that, yeah, we are going to make mistakes and we're learning, and that's okay. Let's be a bit forgiving here. And because, children are not always very forgiving. You're either friends for life or they hate you forever. There's very, very little middle ground. Maybe that's only my children. But so that is in itself quite an important thing to remember, the way we communicate and the way we say things. The other thing as well is that actually English learning is not just in school, it's also at home. And you can support English learning at home in different ways. First of all, in linguistics, if you're very competent in your mother tongue, it means that studies suggest that you're also going to be very competent in your additional language. So the idea that, you can't be bilingual, if you are bilingual, you're going to be slower at learning or that sort of thing, that's not true. In fact, what happens is that children, having read into this, what happens is that children, what they do, if they know 80 words, they will know 40 in one language and 40 in the other language. But you can only see 40 in the language that you know, because that's the one you notice, the other one you don't engage in. So actually, don't worry about it. That catches up anyway. So that's number one. And number two, during holidays, when we have long breaks, 3 weeks at Christmas, in the summer, do expose them to English. Make them watch telly, Netflix, whatever, books, that sort of thing, because then you're going to keep the flame going otherwise. If you turn off completely everything for 3 months and they don't speak English at all for, not 3 months, 3 weeks or whatever, then there's going to be a bit of a loss, and I think it's very important to keep it going as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's sort of it for time from us. If you do have any questions, we will hang around at the end, so please feel free to come and ask. But thank you very much, everyone, for joining us this morning. And we'll send information about our next event in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much.